Hey everybody, welcome. It's Brian from Witch Doctor. Thanks for tuning in. I went ahead and extended the brass test that I've recently published on my YouTube page. If you've been tuning in, what I did is I took the Lapua 220 Russian case, a 22 Norma 22 PPC case, Norma 6 PPC case, and the Starline 6.5 Grendel case, neck down to 6 millimeter. And fired them in a 6 ppc chamber. Did that 10 times with 5 pieces of brass each, using different charge weights. First couple 2-3 charges were pretty light, just to sort of get it fire formed. Next set of charges were pretty medium to high. And then I did a few really high charges of N133 using 30.5 grains, 30.7 grains, and 34.5 grains. So really kind of put them through the test for 10 shots. Measured several dimensions and published that on the previous video. I won't review all that right now. And basically, found some interesting results, but I wasn't really satisfied with the results. I wanted to fire these things a lot more and see what happened. So instead of firing all 5 of each set of brass and burning through a whole bunch of powders, bullets, and taking up a appreciable amount of one barrel, I just randomly picked one piece from each set and decided to go ahead and fire one piece from each set 10 times, using what I would consider a fairly standard load of N133 for me here, where I shoot, for my 100-yard load. Typically on my 100-yard load, I'll settle from anywhere between 29.8 to 30.2 grains. So I wanted to fire each piece of this brass with 30.2 grains of N133 10 more times, okay? So I did that. I took to the range, brought my powder thrower with me and all my range gear to go ahead and load at the range, and fired each one of these 10 times. And I will go through with you what happened with the measurements that I took after I fired these each time. Okay, first I want to just review one thing, because I think this was possible conclusion from in the last video that I demonstrated, was case web diameter. So looking at that 0.200 datum line down here near the sort of near the case head of the brass, looking at the diameter down there, I had pointed out before that in terms of overall growth of the case web, that the highest growth, the peak of the growth, where eventually it kind of the growth chart basically leveled out, was when I fired 30.2 grains of N133. Okay, so I think that is probably an early pressure sign that's kind of determining that okay, now you're kind of on maybe the lower end of the high pressure curve, because it expanded that case web diameter kind of maximally, and it stayed the same even after firing 30.5 twice and 30.7 once. So I think that is a sign that kind of like, here you are, you're now on the higher pressure end, and that diameter now has grown maximally, and no matter what you do, it's not really going to change because you've already shot it at like a high pressure level. The pressure signs, so if you recall, I did accrue data on pressure signs, and the first one that was a notable actual pressure sign was with the Lapua case when I did my first firing at 30.5, where I found a firing pin crater, okay? And also with the first piece of, or the number one, or the brass labeled number 1 for Norma 6 PPC, a very slight click upon extraction. So it seems like at 30.2, the case web diameter was the notable sort of pressure sign. And then once it got up to the high pressure areas, then we started seeing signs like on the primer and on extraction, okay? So that's kind of, I think, the first conclusion we saw from previous testing. One other thing too I want to go over is the, where are you? Oh, no, you're back here. There's so much data. Case head thickness. For whatever reason in my last video, that portion of the video got cut off. I have no idea why. But let's go ahead and review that, and I'll review that also with the data that we actually added to the database for the 10 additional firings from the last set of firings. So essentially what we observed, what was observed was the first firing in Lapua took the case head and actually kind of shrunk it a bit, which was very interesting. And then once after that first firing, or here for brass piece number 3, it was actually after the second firing for that piece of brass, but for the other 4, it was after the first firing, that the case head thickness stabilized and was pretty thin in comparison to the other brands. At the end of the test, after all 20 firings, the case head was about the same as it was with the other measures of case head thickness. With Norma 22 ppc, it started off with a relatively thinner case head and then grew, which I thought was interesting. So it grew just a little though. And then after, again, that first firing, then it stabilized. Norma 6 ppc had the same pattern as the 22 ppc, where most of them started off a little smaller and then grew after the first firing. And Starline was kind of the same way as the Norma. Started off just slightly smaller, and then after the first firing grew a little bit, and then stabilized thereafter. So, and again, I mean stabilized thereafter, meaning there was very little variation in the size from measure to measure. I mean, it could have been accounted for by, you know, the carbon buildup down in that area. I don't know, but certainly not a whole lot. It was after the first firing where we saw either a lot of shrinkage or growth. So basic recommendation for that is if you're going to measure this and sort by this, which I do recommend based on previous findings that it affects velocity, is to do the measurement after the first firing. So get that puppy fire formed, you know, after the first firing, and then or at least get one firing to fire form it done and out of the way, and then go ahead and use the measure after that first firing to then do your sorting, because it will change after that first firing. Okay, so that was the deal with case head thickness, and after the 20th firing for all of them, the measurement was very similar. I mean, we were getting between 0.181 and 0.182 thickness with the Norma 6 ppc, and after 20 firings it was 0.184. So probably just a little bit of carbon buildup there, but again, didn't vary a whole hell of a lot, whole heck of a lot from the previous measurements. Okay, so that's the deal with case head thickness. Let's look at primer pocket diameter. Was a big one. I mean, you know, let's face it, no one likes to, you know, go into a shooting match and have their primer pockets opening up. It's not a comfortable feeling. You also, you know, kind of don't want to have to deal with loose pockets. There's consequences to that. There's primers falling out. There's primers not seating correctly at the right depth. There's, you know, blowback that you can, you know, get etching on your bolt face. There's any number of bad outcomes, and they don't tend to fire that good either. And so previous findings found, again, you know, Lapua's baseline diameter was 0.173, and all through all 10 of the initial firings it stayed at 173. Norma 22 ppc and Norma 6 ppc started at 172, but then after, you know, 4 or 5, 6 firings grew to about 173 and then sort of stayed that way. Starline was the one that they started at 173, much like Lapua, and then grew to 174 pretty much, you know, within the, you know, 7th firing they were all at 174 and then just stayed that way. Okay, so what happened during firing 11 through 20? Let's take a look. So Lapua stayed at 170, and again, all 10, you know, 11 through 20 was all 30.2. Okay, same bullet. Or we used the Joker 67.3 grain bullet on an 825 jacket. Again, these are what I would consider a fairly standard load for me, shooting at 100 yards with a 6 ppc. And I use the Joker bullet frequently, both the 790 and the 825 jacket. And so anyway, Lapua stayed at 173 up to the 16th firing, and then at the 17th firing, it increased to 174, and stayed that way all the way through the 20th firing. Okay, and I previously mentioned 174 is not extremely wide, and I actually made a little sort of key here. If it's at 173 or below, the seating is very tight. It feels really good going in. It's going to stay put and everything's good. At 173, it's a little bit looser. You can definitely tell it's a little bit looser, but they seat well. They stay in there and they seat to the depth that I set them at. So not bad. If they grew greater than 173, 174, then that's where, okay, if it's at 174, you can feel it. They're a bit looser. You can definitely feel out upon seating, but they're not super duper loose. Like I wasn't concerned that any of them were going to fall out. They were seating to the right depth, but I can tell I was getting right near the threshold where if they grew any more, I'd have to pitch them at that point. So anything at 174 this is why I put it in yellow, is kind of a caution. Like, here we go, we're getting really close to not being able to use this brass, because if it grows beyond that, no way, we're not using it. But so anyway, Lapua hit 174 at the 16th firing. Norma 22 ppc stayed at 173 all the way up to the last firing, and then it grew to 174. Norma 6 ppc stayed at 173 throughout all 20 firings, so the 6 ppc did not grow into the caution realm of 174. Starline just stayed at 174. So that particular brass piece was at 174 from the 6th firing all the way to the 20th. So even though Starline grew the quickest, it just kind of stayed at 174 the whole time. And then on the flip side of that, the Norma 6 ppc, grew from 172 to 173, but stayed at the 173 all throughout all 20 firings. Okay. All right, let's quickly review flash hole diameter. I checked that after the 20th firing, and Lapua had no change in the flash hole size. It had shrunk from the no firing at all virgin brass to 10 firings. It shrunk quite a bit, in fact, 13 thousandths overall for the 5 pieces of Lapua. But the one piece of Lapua that I shot an additional 10 times did not show any change. The Norma 22 ppc from virgin to 10 firings did grow 1 thousandths. The 5 out of all the 5 pieces, there was only 1 thousandth cumulative growth. But then from 11 to 20 firings, that piece shrunk to from 0.063 to 0.062. So just a 1 thousandth shrink. And then Norma 6 ppc, there was no change at all in the flash hole diameter. It was always 0.063. And with Starline, from baseline to 10 firings, the change, it shrunk 6 thousandths cumulative for all 5 of those pieces. And for the 5th piece that I shot 11 through 20th times, there was no change. It was pretty much the same as it was after the 10th firing. So overall, Lapua definitely shrunk the most, 13 thousandths. Norma 22 ppc demonstrated slight growth for the first 10 firings, and then a thousandths in shrinkage from 11 to 20. So some flexing going on there. Norma 6 ppc was no change whatsoever throughout the entire test, all 20 firings. And Starline shrunk a cumulative 6,000. Okay, so some key findings throughout all of this testing, just to summarize this. First of all, case web diameter is probably an indicator of pressure, early pressure signs, when you're not seeing the signs on like the primer, or with extraction or other different pressure signs that we know about. Also, it appears here that primer pocket diameter, Starline opens up early on in the process. Lapua opens up, earlier than the Normas, and then Normas, out of both of those, the 6 ppc didn't open up after all 20. So that was interesting. I sort of profiled each set of brass to see if I can identify any trends that could help us understand interrelationships among the variables, especially as it relates to primer pocket diameter, because that's kind of a big deal. Like I mentioned before, we pay close attention to that. So I profiled the Norma 6 ppc. Primer pocket diameter never grew beyond 173, which was good. That means seating was very tight, and seating depth was perfect, and everything was as it should be. Here's a key finding. Norma also had the thickest case head. It was around 0.1815 to 0.184 in that area. So it was the thickest case head of all of the brass brands looked at here. The case web growth was the same as Norma 22 ppc, but total cumulative sizing was about 5 thousandths less than the Norma 22 ppc. So maybe it had just a little bit of harder brass in that area, or for whatever reason, the design of the brass in that area was basically some way not necessitating as much sizing, but only by 5 thousandths, so not a whole heck of a lot. There was also no change in flash hole diameter, so that was interesting too. With the Norma 22 ppc, that had less case head thickness than the Norma 6 ppc. So for whatever reason, Norma, back when I had the 6 ppc, bought the 6 ppc brass, had a thicker case head, but then later on, it was a little bit thinner, not by a whole lot, but a little bit, So they were around the 0.175, 0.178 range, and that's right around where Starline was. The total cumulative case web sizing was the highest for Norma 22 ppc relative to Lapua. So the total cumulative case head sizing was 0.396 for Norma 22 ppc. Lapua was 0.0126, which had the least by a long shot. Norma 6 ppc was 0.0345, and Starline was 0.0387. The flash hole shrunk only 1 thousandths after 20 firings. Lapua had the thinnest case heads. They were around 0.163, 0.167. Case web diameter at baseline conformed the best to the chamber dimensions. Growth was the least, as well as cumulative total sizing. I mean, that makes sense when the brass itself is already conforming really well to the chamber. So it showed very little growth and very little sizing, cumulative sizing. The flash hole diameter, however, shrunk the most at 13 thousandths. Norma 22 ppc, it grew 1 thousandths. Norma 6 ppc didn't grow at all or shrink at all. It stayed the same the whole way. And Starline had a shrinkage of 6 thousandths. So Lapua, shrunk almost double from what the next in ranking there was Starline shrinking 6 thousandths. Okay, and then the Starline profile. Case head thickness was the same as the Norma 22 ppc. Case web diameter was about 1 thousandths wider at baseline relative to the Normas, but still had cumulative sizing similar to Normas. So why, if it conformed to the chamber better than the Normas, did it still have basically the same amount of cumulative sizing than the Normas? That didn't make sense. So maybe there's some flexibility going on in that area that's affecting the primer pocket diameter. I don't know. Flash holes shrunk 6 thousandths, which wasn't as much as Lapua at 13 thousandths, but substantially more than the Normas. Okay, so in conclusion, the brass with the thickest case head maintained the tightest primer pockets and had the least amount of change to the flash hole diameter. Vickers hardness testing showed no difference in hardness in the case heads of the Lapua and the Norma 22 ppc, yet Lapua's primer pocket diameter grew to 174 well before the Norma 22 ppc, which suggests that Vickers hardness made pretty much minimal to no contribution in primer pocket diameter changes, whereas case head thickness difference was statistically significantly different between the two, with Lapua having much thinner case head thickness than the Norma 22 ppc. Taken together with all this data, it suggests that case head thickness may be a strong determinant in the structural integrity of the primer pocket diameter, and shrinkage of the flash hole diameter may be a major indicator of future increases to the primer pocket diameter. Okay, so that's pretty much what we're concluding here with this testing. And so there you go. There's the data. Okay, just wanted to share one more quick piece of data before we end this series on these brass brands. I went ahead, and when I did my 11th through 20th shots with each piece of each brass brand, I went ahead and actually just shot all four of them in the same at the same target, just to see if they will group together. Just for just for the sake of just kind of exploring this, see, are they going to shoot together? And so I actually put a new barrel on and had to sight it in. And so my first shot was way to the left. I moved it over. I way overcompensated. Second shot was way over to the right. And then finally got the compensation correct and got it lined up with the square target here. Shot two more, and then they went in together. So then I moved over here, and again, after that, I went and reloaded all four, took them all to the line. And by the way, after this firing here, after the sight in, I thoroughly cleaned the barrel, because that's what I do with the break-in on this barrel. The manufacturer for this particular barrel recommends, fire a few, clean it, fire a few, clean it. So I figured I'll fire four and then clean it. And then the first shot always went left, and then the next three went in kind of together. Okay, so after I shot this group here, I then thoroughly cleaned the barrel, came back, fired the first shot, went left again, and then three went in the group together, thoroughly cleaned the barrel. And by the way, the bore was really cold at this point because, it took me a while to go to the loading area, take my measurements, charge the brass, seat the bullet, all this. By the time I got back to the bench to shoot, barrel was cool. So this is, and then I did that again, and this, the first shot went a little up and left, and then the next three went down together. So that's with a clean and cold bore. So I decided, you know what, I'm not going to clean after this. I'm going to see if this effect of the one shot pulling, to the left is due to a cold bore or due to a clean bore. So I left the bore dirty after these four shots, went out and shot the next four, and bam, they kind of hold up together. Kept the barrel dirty, I didn't clean it, shot the next four, and they went in the same hole. Didn't clean the barrel, shot the next four, all went in the same hole. Didn't clean the barrel, shot there, and then, still hung together, but one kind of popped up a little bit. Didn't clean the barrel, and then bam, the last four shot group, all of them went in pretty darn well together there. That's a tiny group. So in conclusion, I was able to look at this and say, okay, it's not necessarily a cold bore that's throwing that first shot to the left. It's fouling. And so I wrote in my notes, for this particular barrel, you definitely have to foul it with a minimum one shot, because if you don't, you're gonna have one fly out. So I took notes, put that in my data book for this barrel. Will that be consistent and constant through the life of this barrel? I don't know. It is most of the time with most barrels, but sometimes it changes. After the barrel gets 150 rounds through it, all of a sudden, it throws two and you need two foulers, or fouling doesn't matter. It's the cold bore now that it's throwing one. So, but anyway, this is how I kind of test for that phenomenon. And I was lucky to just be kind of combining this brass brand test along with sort of breaking in a new barrel and also testing that and taking observations on that. So anyway, just some stuff to think about. And real quick, just in case you're wondering, you're saying, well, there's only 9 there, Brian. You shot 10. I did originally intend on, and I set up the target this way, where I set it by brand, and I intended on just shooting 1 out of the 4 on each of 4 targets for each brand, and then, going back, loading, coming back, and shooting that 1 on each of the 4, and doing that 10 times to get a 10-shot group for each brand. but after I shot that first set, I thought, no, I'd rather see how they cluster together, to see if like mixing brass brands was going to, make any difference. But, it looks like with fouling the barrel, you get some pretty good sized groups there. I didn't measure them, but that aggregate is fairly respectable, even, with using three different brass brands and then two different styles of brass within one brand. But anyway, so there you go. Interesting stuff. Well, all right, everyone. This concludes the brass brand test. I look forward to your comments. Please join my Patreon so we can have a discussion about these results. We have a really good learning community in my Patreon, and have a lot of great discussion about this stuff, and are collaborating quite a bit on testing and sharing of data and things like that. So, and also I posted this complete data set on my Patreon for people. If you join as a patron, you would be able to then download it and then do whatever data exploration you want, or keep it as a reminder of what measurements there were, and raw data, things like that. So anyway, thanks for tuning in, and hope everything goes well for your 2024. Shoot small.